Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode, we were joined by Fabian Gompf, the CEO of the Web3 Foundation, an entity that nurtures and stewards technologies and applications in the fields of decentralized web software protocols with a primary focus on the Polkadot ecosystem. In this episode, we spoke about Polkadot's early days, applicable and less applicable uses for blockchain technologies, the similarities between Polkadot's white paper and the Ethereum L2 landscape today, the recent uproar about the ecosystem's treasury spending, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that the host or guest may hold tokens discussed in any given episode. You can check out a disclaimer on the Neo News Today webpage to learn more. Also, if you appreciated this episode, please like, subscribe, and comment on your favorite podcasting platform. Every like, comment, and subscription really helps us get these episodes in front of more ears and eyes. With all that said, I really enjoyed this conversation with Fabian, and I hope you enjoy it too. Today, we're joined by Fabian Gompf, the CEO of the Web3 Foundation, an entity that is dedicated to building an internet where users are in control of their own data, identity, and destiny. Fabian, how are you doing today?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having me.
We had a blast chatting a little bit before we hit the record button. And it's clear that you're obviously steeped in blockchain and Web3. You've been here for years. But to jump into the conversation, I just have to know, because I took a different path into computer sciences, crypto. So how does someone with a master's degree in philosophy from Oxford end up in crypto?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you've done your research, I can tell. So I have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. So there was more, previous academic journey was a little bit closer to all of this. And this actually coincides with sort of like Bitcoin first hitting my radar. I think it was at my first uni semester. So it was like 2012 or so, 2012. I had people around me that were much more into it. Like they were, what could you do at the time? I mean, you could trade, you could maybe mine, and then at some point, all of these Bitcoin folks started to like pop up, and you could maybe sort of like, what are meme coins today? Kind of were Bitcoin folks at the time. But there wasn't really much for me to do. At least I didn't feel like there was much for me to do. So it wasn't until 2016 or so when I graduated. I was stuck in a boring German automotive sort of like R&D job, and if I got you right there, intro conversation, maybe similar to you, was looking for something that's more dynamic, that's more interesting, that's more fast paced. Through a mutual friend, got introduced to a bunch of people in the Ethereum ecosystem. So Ethereum, especially the developer group around Ethereum, was very present in Berlin at the time. I moved to Berlin. I got to know Gas, who was one of the co-founders and so the original CTO of Ethereum, and also like core devs. And there was a new organization that just got started at the time called S-Core, and then eventually rebranded to Parity Technologies. And we were mostly focused on building an implementation of the Ethereum protocol. It's now called Open Ethereum. It's still out there. It's not maintained anymore by Parity. But at a certain point in time, we were powering a big chunk of the Ethereum network through a Rust implementation. And at some point in 2017, we sort of like, we had the feeling like there's enough product ideas here in our head, or protocol ideas, that we don't just want to keep implementing, the stack of the Ethereum protocol, but we would love to like design protocols ourselves, evolve them ourselves. This is how sort of like Polkadot slowly came to be. So, I'm not a co-founder of Parity, but I'm sort of like there in Polkadot from day zero as it came out of that organization and then eventually sort of like unfolded. I think that's sort of my path into crypto, I guess. And then, I spent 6-7 years at Parity, left in 2021, which is a very hot time for Polkadot. I left, was out for about 1.5 years, and then first joined the the supervisory board, and then joined the foundation as the CEO at the end of this year. So at the end of last year. So that's my journey into crypto and then my journey through Polkadot, if you want.
Yeah, that's awesome. I only ask because in undergrad, I accidentally took a level 400 philosophy course because I thought I was interested in the subject matter. And Martin Heidegger's Being in Time effectively pushed me away from ever wanting to delve further into philosophy.
Yeah. That's so my philosophy journey is really more of one of like academic pastime hobby kind of thing. But if you encounter the wrong philosopher at the wrong time in your journey into this field, it may be hard for you. It's not, you have to approach the whole thing the right way, definitely. But yeah, there's also interesting overlaps for me now. Like I spend a good amount of time on like moral philosophy and ethics and so on. And, everything that is like my work is like science and tech and research and business. Right? It's all the question of like, what can we do? Right? Like what is possible against the physical world, but also what can we afford doing and sort of like on the business side. And the other side is more like, what should we do? Right? Like, okay, we now know what we can do. We're pretty good at figuring out what we can do, but like what out of those things are actually desirable end states. So it's a good combination for me, dabbling in philosophy and doing the work I do.
Yeah, I appreciate that dichotomy of focusing on the very engineering side of, here are the parameters we have to operate in and here's what we can do. But then also the kind of like more ethereal, like larger scale, where's the puck going? What can we do? Not just what can we do with the tech, but like what can we do with the ideology that this tech enables and the freedoms that it opens up. And so I guess maybe as you've been the VP of ecosystem development at Parity, and now you're the CEO of the Web3 Foundation, over the years, how have these pulls and pushes in different directions of being tech focused and then also being kind of idea focused, how have you noticed the changes as you've progressed through the blockchain space since 2016?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think it definitely has changed. I mean, even just what we call like, there are different factions of blockchain ideology within the broader blockchain industry, if you want to call it that, at this point. And if you look at sort of like what was there at the very beginning, sort of like the core Bitcoin sort of like philosophy, that was much more cyberpunky and sort of like, against establishment, to say like, I don't know, like let's say the first DeFi summer, right? Or like the NFT craze that sort of like followed shortly after, which was clearly a very different sort of like Web3 blockchain philosophy and world, right? And there's certainly technical things that have changed that I think allowed this philosophical change. I don't think it was necessarily that much the other way around. Like because Ethereum gave us a general purpose sort of like environment to play with and allowed for like, the easy deployment of NFTs and decentralized exchanges and so on. Then, that opportunity attracted people who are interested in that kind of, in those kind of solutions. And, I think certainly traditionally, if I say we, I mean like the Polkadot ecosystem, but also certainly the Web3 Foundation as an organization come more from this like cyberpunky world, right? That's certainly where a lot of like the early Ethereum, early Polkadot days came out as sort of just post-Snowden world and sort of like all of that was like very present. That being said, right, like there is all kinds of use cases now that we've uncovered on blockchain that, may still be, true to that, initial idea somewhere, right? But like are, one step, two steps removed. But if you look at sort of like the technical designs that we've done in Polkadot, the way we approach community building and all of that is still much more true to this original cyberpunky kind of vision than it is the case with many of the people who build solutions maybe in a similar category as we did.
Mm-hmm. And like I bought my first Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin in summer of 2017. And that was just 3 years later, there was DeFi summer. And then a few months later, the NFT craze. I couldn't have predicted that these were going to be the things that onboarded the masses well, maybe DeFi was more crypto native, but the NFTs certainly were bringing in the non-crypto natives, the non-Web3 users, kind of similar to maybe what we've seen with like the craze in celeb coins and meme coins this cycle. But I'm curious from like a foundation's perspective, how do you kind of keep this into consideration? Do you just build out the infrastructure and just assume the market will figure out a way to use these technologies? Or can you kind of maybe get a finger on the pulse and get a sense that maybe in 2 or 3 years, there could be something like a DeFi summer, there could be something like an NFT craze, or there could be something like whatever we're not thinking about right now?
Yeah. I think it's a question that probably anyone who builds sort of like generic platforms ultimately like struggles with, right? Like how opinionated do you want to go in and maybe, make it really good for like a specific use case, but then lose a bunch of other use cases and on the path there. It's sort of like the Swiss Army knife, right? It's like can do all kinds of stuff, but like it's not really good at anything. I mean, if you really a professional chef doesn't use it, a professional handyman doesn't use it, right? So you could really build the Swiss, the kitchen knife, but then you don't have a screwdriver on the back of it, right? And so this is a little bit the issue you have with these platforms is like, how opinionated do you want to go and to what extent can you even predict the future? I think there's specific ways of approaching it, but certainly one way that we take in Polkadot and that I think is also, to some extent validated in the history of technology innovation is there's certain things that no matter the use case, people will want, right? What's a good historical example? So for example, you'll hear someone like Jeff Bezos, if you look at like old investor letters, right, or old interviews, you will speak a lot about, we want to sell everything on Amazon, right? Like we don't really care what's being sold on it. We don't want to have an opinion on that. But there's certain things that everyone will care about. You want the stuff to be as fast on your storefront as possible. You want it as cheap as possible. You want to have as big of a selection as possible. You want things to be high quality, right? Like you can still optimize for certain things that you think are, at least amongst most of those categories, they're probably going to be relevant, right? And so like a blockchain equivalent being, you probably want things to be as scalable as possible. No one wants to hit scalability limits when the application actually goes to the roof. No one wants to pay crazy fees. Everyone wants the thing to be fast and performant and easy to, like those are things that are true no matter the use case. So those things you should definitely be focusing on, like sort of like first thing. And then I do think you can have, you can catch some waves and you can support certain trends if you see them shaping out. And like, I think, for example, DeFi is a good use case because ultimately we're talking about sort of like permissionless systems, and most of the permissioning in those systems comes through economic permissioning, right? It's like you stake something or you lock something up or you pay for something and then you get a certain right. And sort of like in the absence of civil resistance and real identity on these chains, I think the, DeFi in the sense of like stable coins and liquidity on those and DEXs where you can swap these tokens back and forth and so on, is always going to be relevant, right? Whether a lot of these like more complicated, primitive, and people will actually buy houses with a loan on chain, I don't know, right? We can maybe not, but like the fact that they have to be able to swap tokens within your economy and be able to move them around, and that they will probably want to have something that's stable against the real economy at some point. Those are things that are, I think, obviously useful for the kinds of systems that we're trying to build, and so we focus on making them good in our platform.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know that we'll zoom back out and chat at the Web3 Foundation level, but I just want to keep the finger on the pulse for your time at Parity. And so for maybe someone who's listening to the podcast, because this is kind of protocol agnostic, we talk to anyone and everyone building on blockchain. So we might not necessarily have someone who's steeped in the Polkadot Kusama ecosystem. Can you just share a little bit about what the focus of Parity is and its relationship to the Polkadot chain and ecosystem? And maybe also kind of in that vein, talk about like the levels of support you provided for Polkadot. Was it purely infrastructure, or was it also like onboarding dApps and dev teams and things of this nature?
Yeah, totally. So this is also changed a little bit. So it's definitely even for people who've maybe been following Polkadot quite closely for a while, but haven't for the last year or so. I think there's something interesting here. So there's Polkadot, there's the Web3 Foundation, there's Parity. Polkadot, there's probably a long version and a short version, but essentially it's a network, a blockchain network. And we can dive into sort of like, how that looks like, but it's not like Polkadot is not an entity. Polkadot is, it's a piece of technology and a community around. Then there is Parity, which is used to be, like I said, sort of like prior to or like you should go back a year, 1.5 years ago, really the main driver behind the success of Polkadot. It would do marketing for Polkadot, ecosystem development for Polkadot. It would build the core technology of Polkadot, tools, developer relations, and so on, right? And then there's Web3 Foundation, which develops the education, the more fundamental research, and a lot of the funding. Now we're moving in Polkadot more and more into a world where we don't just have these like two core organizations and a lot of people that build on the network, but rather it's really a network of core organizations that are pushing Polkadot forward. So there's organizations much more focused on ecosystem development, organizations much more focused on events and community building, venture studios. Like there's a lot of like Polkadot exclusive, Polkadot focused organizations that have sort of like spun up, and it's driven by a very dedicated strategy of the foundation to do so, to also fund and support these teams that allows people to get all kinds of support, right? Whether that is, technical support, funding support, marketing support, those things are all available. And they're available, not just from one or two organizations, but from really a pretty broad set of teams.
So you mentioned when you were kind of giving your CV or your resume for how you ended up in this space, you mentioned that you left Parity in 2021 and that Polkadot was kind of experiencing a moment of like market success. And I view Polkadot as sort of one of the first modular chains that kind of popped up into like the forefront of the token holders and the app developers and dApp developers, because there is this single chain that maintains a state, and then there are these parachains that can compete in order to communicate with that single chain. And at the same time in 2021, we also saw kind of a market attention towards another modular thesis in Cosmos. And you fast forward to today in 2024, and it seems like there's a very strong monolithic focus. If we're using the market as a sort of metric, Solana is kind of like the hot chain. And we've also, to a certain extent, seen this modularity thesis play out with Ethereum, with all the L2s that are built on top of it. So where do you think this kind of like modular monolithic narrative is sort of going? Is it just a kind of moment in time where people just kind of like want to buy Sol because there's meme coins on that chain? Or do you think we're kind of at a crisis moment for modularity and for chains that are trying to build ecosystems of blockchains that communicate with a singular blockchain?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, so first of all, right, like if you go back to sort of like when the Cosmos paper or the Polkadot paper were put out there, this was a pretty radical idea, right? The idea of spinning up, a bunch of chains and then having them sort of like communicate in some shape or form, and making it as easy as possible to build blockchains in the first place. So putting frameworks on that. And then, there's obviously some design decisions that have been made, different design decisions that have been made compared to, the future roadmap of ETH or the future roadmap of Cosmos or Polkadot. But if you look at, the initial Polkadot paper, and you look at Ethereum today with its L2s, there's actually a lot of similarity, right? I think we've all got sort of like inspired by each other. And certainly there's like, this idea of, what's the like modularity narrative here has taken hold, right? Compared to what it once was, sort of like a radical idea. And you see that thing, you can go further, right? Like it's like Avalanche subnets and Cardano with their push now actually using the Polkadot SDK in the background and so on. So, right. So there's still a very broad push in that direction. But that strategy does not come for free, right? That strategy comes at a cost. And I think, what we've tried to do in Polkadot is anticipate a lot of those costs early on and sort of like work against them, right? Like think about how should the base layer token function in a world like this, right? Like what's sensible and economic model for a world like this? I think, now there's a question mark, like how does it look for ETH? How does it look for Atom and so on, right? But we try to put quite a bit of thought into that. How does communication between those different chains actually work? Like it's great, you can spin all of them up, but if they then afterwards are siloed, that's, you're not really getting much further. And, you could go on and on like this. And it's not like we have all of these things figured out, right? But I do think we've managed to get a little bit of a head start on some of these things, because for us, it was like, we want to build a coherent system versus ETH was sort of like, we're going to do ETH 2. And then, actually L2 is like, it was more emergent, right? And therefore, some of these things weren't maybe quite as anticipated. But yeah, I think, Jan, if anything, and we can talk about future iterations of Polkadot, it might probably make sense to go a little bit through this, but there's sort of like this future longer term vision for Polkadot, and especially the base layer of Polkadot that, if anything takes, at least in terms of what it will provide in terms of functionality, takes one step into the direction of more monolithic chains. Because we do recognize that having a coherent global state, or at least semi-coherent global state across all of these applications, actually comes with a lot of benefits, right? And so what we think a lot about when we think about the future iterations of Polkadot, and this is, so we're talking about like 1 year, 2 years, sort of like from now on, and not yet delivered this year, sort of like everything I would say is future iterations. Those kind of design decisions actually start playing a role for us, because we recognize that there's also some value into having, take like Ethereum mainnet, right? Like having essentially everything run on a global coherent state. So the question is, can you have something sort of like a best of two world kind of approach? And I think you can.
Yeah, and so maybe this is a difficult question, because the foundation is tasked with spearheading the growth and the marketing of the ecosystem. But what are the levels of conversations you're having with like enterprise grade clients or institutions, maybe banks, and this is only front of mind because we've seen the launch of the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs this year. So there's a whole new class of interested investors and users. And so I'm curious, like, have there been conversations with enterprise grade entities, clients, institutions? And if so, A, what have these conversations been like? And B, do they also kind of shape the future of Polkadot and Kusama and the way that you and your team envision building out these blockchain networks?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we have to take a little bit apart what we mean by something like enterprise players. I think there is, so there's people who could deploy on the network, right? And we've seen waves of enterprise interest come and go. I think the first time we really saw enterprise interest was from like the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, spearheaded by Consensus in 2017. I think it's the first time like really we had like big pharma might be interested, or like shipping containers on the blockchain or whatever, like that kind of conversation. And it was mostly driven by, both maybe a fear of missing out from these organizations of like, a big new hype, but then also like innovation departments that had some money to spend, but like there wasn't really a big focus on really getting something on chain. And if we're really honest, the technology would have probably also not been ready to do so. And so, those, and we've seen sort of like in different sub areas, sub verticals of blockchain, I think we have things like we've seen things come and go. So in that world, I think it's really important that you are, that like timing matters a lot, right? If you talk to the wrong kind of person at the wrong kind of time, you can waste a ton of resources. So what we see in Polkadot happening, and I don't even know if I would call these like enterprise customers, but they're just larger organizations that already have significant user bases that migrate over. So we've seen just last week, we've seen Mythical Games deploy on Polkadot that, some of the highest ranking sort of like applications on the Apple App Store, like games on the Apple App Store and like trading cards and so on. And it's like, they're not native to Polkadot, and when they didn't start as a Polkadot startup, right? But they found Polkadot technology to be useful for what they're trying to do. And then they bring, hordes of users onto the network, which is in our interest, right? And so these kind of deals, like very forward we're looking, but maybe larger organizations that already has, distribution, I think are very interesting. To what extent, like a bank is gonna, actually build an application on Polkadot, I think, in the like adoption cycle, banks, governments, like all of these like very highly regulated organizations are going to be pretty late to the game. And I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a different element here, which you refer to with like ETFs, right? Or like to what extent can we integrate those assets into the traditional financial system? And there we've obviously seen quite a bit of movement in the last year or so with the Bitcoin ETF and now the ETH ETF. I think, and this is, we are being approached, like those are conversations that are happening. And I think sort of like anyone with enough volume and market cap in the top 20 is being approached about conversations like that. I think the question is, to what extent is the interest on the upside, right? There's all kinds of like regulatory and legal and so on matters that need to be clarified, and you have to have a certain market maturity and all of that. But ultimately you also have to have clients that are actually interested in this asset. And I think we have a very strong power law distribution around this stuff right now. Bitcoin, clearly there's interest. ETH, some interest, probably otherwise it wouldn't have happened. But like, I think it drops off pretty sharply from there. Now that doesn't mean that won't change, right? But to me, that's a different game than bringing some banking consortium onto a blockchain. I think that we're probably further out from seeing something that happen.
Yeah, you mentioned mythical gaming, and I remember from the kind of like 2021 hype cycle, like Web3 games were one of the darling verticals, and it just always seemed to me that gaming and blockchain had kind of a perfect match. Even like Vitalik was inspired to build Ethereum because he lost the World of Warcraft in-game item. So are we there yet for like big AAA gaming studios to integrate blockchain solutions into their game design, the game tech stack? Or are we still like a couple cycles away from that?
Yeah. So what I think we're definitely seeing is like interesting use cases in certain areas from players that, maybe that's not a Ubisoft, right? But from players that are significant in the gaming industry for sure. I think we're also, it's gaming, but I think there's maybe a bit of a broader category here around entertainment. Is maybe the broadest category I could come up with, where we see quite a bit of activity on Polkadot. Like, we have quite a few things in the Polkadot X happening around music and events, because you have a lot of like, similar aspects of like fan loyalty and mechanisms like that going on. And so I think if we see certain mechanisms work in gaming, there's going to be related fields, but they're probably also applicable. It's at least that's what we're sort of like seeing emerging in the Polkadot ecosystem. And they're broadly in the category of entertainment. But I don't know, is the next, iteration of World of Warcraft, are you going to be able to like, throw your sword on a DEX and trade it for some ETH? We'll probably still further out from that. But like really Web3 native gaming, that manages to attract significant amounts of users, not just because you paid him a ton of money in your own token, but actually because the people love playing the game and love being able to trade it and love being able to take it somewhere else. I think is very much on the horizon.
Yeah, I also think that entertainment is just a fantastic kind of realm for Web3. Red Rocks is kind of a major venue here in Colorado. Back in the day, it's kind of like a show at Red Rocks is kind of what propelled U2 to become kind of famous. And the last time I was at a Red Rocks show, there was an artist that was trying to give away like a specific mixtape that they were only delivering to folks who were at that show. And to me, this was a perfect kind of moment for Web3. You can use your digital ticket that's represented as an NFT in order to claim this specific MP3 that the artist was trying to give to people who were at that event only. But I realized that the sort of onboarding experience is still too abstract for the normal person. They don't want to download a wallet. They don't want to preload it with gas. They don't want to learn about storing a private seed for their keys. They don't want to learn about any of this. So are you sort of in the folks that are onboarding for the entertainment realm into the Polkadot ecosystem? How far along are they at in that process? And I don't mean to necessarily single out Polkadot, but maybe this is just representative for teams that are building for entertainment on blockchain right now. Are they solving the problem of abstracting away these complex processes that you and I and other crypto natives are willing to do in order to own an NFT? Or are we also similar to you were just talking about with the Web3 and gaming space? We're still kind of a few years away from like the masses being able to swap in game items for ETH.
And so I think we've made huge progress in the last 2 years or so on this. Like being able, like mostly Polkadot perspective now, but I know there's efforts in all kinds of places around this, but being able to like, you don't actually need the native token to do the transaction on the network. You don't actually need to download the wallet. Like you take something like Mythical Game. I mean, you can download the app right now on the App Store and start playing it, and you don't really know, that there's like Polkadot in the background. You also don't need to know. And so, that's I think where the journey is going. And I think we really have, if not all, really most of the tools in our hand. I also think there's a lot more we can do on the application layer rather than on the protocol layer. Like if you, I don't know, if you, you trade some in-game item and maybe it does take, a few seconds or whatever, like for this transaction to finalize on the network. But as a user, you don't have to show that to the user, right? Like it doesn't matter for the user that this is what's going on in the background. And so there's things like that, right? Where you can also, maybe some of the transactions would be slower than it being sort of like on some centralized backend, but there's just no, if you're smart enough about it, you can give a user pretty much the same experience. So, there's different levels to it for sure, but I do think we're much closer now than we've ever been.
Currently, there's a lot of tribalism when it comes to like a blockchain network and token holders, and they love their tokens and they're going to fight till the end of days. And this world that you're just describing, it's going to be very chain agnostic at the end of the day when the end user, the normie, my mom, like someone doesn't know that they're even using blockchain on the back end. What happens then in that future? Are we like, is this multi-chain thesis really going to play out? Are blockchains going to have name recognition when they can be easily swapped on the back end from any front end application? Like what happens to the diehard token holder and their love for the blockchain in that future?
Yeah, look, I think we'll just have different user groups of these platforms. Like we will have people who really invest in the token, right, and are therefore invested in its future and have an opinion on it. And in Polkadot, through that also get significant governance rights to like talk about how the future of the network should be looking like. But you will also have people that are just interested in some form of end user application and want to use that and are really that interested or invested in how the platform underneath is going to look like. And I think certain use cases, lend themselves more for one or the other, or will have more user groups in one category or in the other. But yeah, I do think you can build games where the underlying platform really doesn't matter all that much. And, most people will not care about the success of the back end. Versus, if you go, for example, in DeFi, where it's a lot about yield and locking tokens up and so on, and you almost never are able to get around the fact of holding the most liquid asset in that ecosystem or the highest market cap asset in that ecosystem is just often the base layer token. And therefore you're like automatically invested. And, those use cases are much closer to you caring about sort of like the underlying thing. You're also usually much more crypto native. So yeah, I think we'll just have different user groups, and I think that will also speak to maturity of the tech.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective because it's like the internet. Not everybody uses it for the same reason, and I kind of want to use this opportunity to jump into some drama that the Polkadot ecosystem witnessed in summer of 2024. So basically, like a lot of the broader crypto community was up in arms because a transparency report from the Polkadot ecosystem came out about how governance played a huge role in Polkadot token holders basically voting to fund a wide variety of marketing initiatives to the tune of like approximately $37 million or 5 million dot. The specific numbers might be a little bit higher or lower, but basically the community voted on ways to market the Polkadot ecosystem. And that went to a lot of KOLs. It went to podcast hosts. I listen to Unchained by Laura Shin all the time. And she's, doing Polkadot advertisements on her show. So there was just like a marketing spend that was community approved. And there was a huge backlash because it, is a splashy amount of number. So what the heck happened? Like, how did the community vote on this? And then all of a sudden, when the transparency report came out, everybody was up in arms.
Yeah. Okay. So I have thoughts, as you can imagine, on this whole thing. So there's a couple of things maybe to clarify before we jump into sort of like my opinion on it. So one is it's important to understand how governance works in Polkadot. Right. So Polkadot from the start, we've taken a very strong stance, stronger than really any other blockchain network on-chain governance, right? We said, okay, we don't, government, there's always going to be some governance going on, whether that's in back rooms or it's through like full force and Bitcoin or whatever, or whether it's formalized on-chain, right? So might as well bring it into the open, really sort of like if we anyways have like this global coordination system, might as well use it to govern the system itself, right? And we lean very hard into that, right? So Polkadot, Polkadot really can upgrade itself, and it's really unique in that. Like if you want to change the Polkadot protocol itself, you sort of like register a piece of code on there, everyone votes on it, and then automatically on-chain enforceably, the system just upgrades itself to that code, right? There's no coordination of like people need to upgrade their nodes or whatever. Like it's really sort of like it's a self-evolving living mechanism, if you want, is the Polkadot network. Now, another piece of that governance system is an on-chain DAO, like what they call the treasury, right? Sort of like it's a part of the Dodge token economy includes some sort of like revenue going, or some money going, some DOT going into a pot that the community can vote on and can distribute for things that they think are important. So this is the element we're talking about, right? And towards the end of last year, internally in the foundation, we started to talk about, we think like spending there is not really going in the direction. We've been reasonably hands off. We were like, this is the community. We have our own money in the foundation. We do things we think is all good for Polkadot. And they, the community can take it what they want to take it, like do more out there things like that we wouldn't fund. It's generally a good sort of like split of responsibilities. Towards the end of last year, we were like, we think it's getting a little bit out of hand, right? We started a couple of things. We don't have to go into all of the missions we started, but one of the things we've done is fund a group called OpenGov.Watch, essentially as sort of like secretaries of the Polkadot governance system, if you want. And part of what they were supposed to do is like write these transparency reports to inform the community around spending and budgeting considerations and what's, where things should be going. Now that report was put out there and written specifically in a spicy manner to like, become a meme in the Polkadot, like get viral into the Polkadot community. And it went so viral that it sort of like escaped the Polkadot bubble. And, like suddenly everyone was talking about this thing, right? But it's really like, it's sort of like the guy on the bicycle with a stick in his own, like it's funded by us. We wanted it to be out there. Like we wanted to have that conversation because we thought it's an important conversation to have. So it's not like we learned something when the stuff went through. No one in the Polkadot community learned something it didn't know before. But okay, the overarching crypto industry learns something about Polkadot, which might be good as well. But I think it's not like the Polkadot treasury is going to run out of money in 2 years or something like that. There's currently like a big buffer in there, and we've seen a reduction of that. But there's continuous inflows going in. Obviously, Polkadot is not running out of money because the foundation sits on tons of cash and other crypto and whatnot to fund things, right? There's other funding resources than this bucket, right? So like a lot of the like headlines of like Polkadot running out of money in like 2 years they're nonsense. But this treasury the approach to treasury having to be more sustainable and with a bit more thought, that's definitely real. And like I said, something I very much agree with, and I would like to see changing. I think, if you also look at the Polkadot community in some of these fans, there's really a group of sort of like more activist investors who are really keen on marketing and more out there marketing. But there's a political spectrum in Polkadot. There's people with other opinions, in particular, a lot of people on the builder side who are much more interested in more grassroots, bottom up, developer community kind of stuff, rather than, the Polkadot logo on some billboard, right? I personally think, like, especially a lot of the like more out there, like sponsoring stuff or just slapping a logo on something without a call to action is not particularly good, not particularly sensible, right? It's fine if that happens here and there. It's fine if, if the on-chain DAO funds marketing activities in general. Like, for example, a lot of the Polkadot events around the world are funded through this bucket of money, and then I think it's the right approach. But yeah, there's other things that have been part of this, whatever 30 million spent, that, us not having done it through the foundation tells you, I think, how we think about it. There's certainly a core truth here. There's maybe one more element I would say, which is some of those numbers are, of course, also overblown because they just look at when was the money committed and not when was the money spent or when was the activity actually, a lot of these activities actually run for a year or longer. It's not, anyways, you can slice those numbers up differently and they look much less severe. But that's maybe more of a side note. That's I think, so like it's TLDR on that topic.
Well, I think there's two things here. First, like, aren't we in an innovative, cutting edge, new way of herding cats and just bringing people together with decentralized peer-to-peer networks? And if we're going to be experimenting like what Bitcoin and Ethereum and Polkadot and every other cryptocurrency and blockchain network out there is, aren't we going to break some eggs if we want to make an omelet? And this was an experiment in on-chain governance and frankly, allowing community members to have an opportunity in the say of how a treasury is spent. I spend a lot of my time in the Neo ecosystem, which is an OG blockchain from 2015. And marketing is a huge problem that a lot of token holders have. They want to see the foundation shill more. They want to see more marketing initiatives that maybe a company wouldn't necessarily do because it doesn't make any sense. And so to give that kind of power to the treasury voters, I think it's I think it was an amazing experiment. And maybe the numbers are a little bit bloated, but like they got to throw a little bit of money around in ways that they felt would be the right way to spend it. And whether the experiment was a success or not, who knows? They say that any press is good press, and here we are talking about Polkadot. I heard a lot of people that hadn't been talking about Polkadot last year talking about it during this moment of drama, bringing up the ecosystem, the on-chain treasury, and it also opened up an opportunity to talk about the differences between the treasury and the funding of Web3 Foundation, the true entity tasked with really focusing on building out the architecture and supporting the builders of the ecosystem. So I thought it was kind of some spicy drama that was really kind of invigorating, even though if like you guys might have had to deal with people throwing poop on your house, whatever. And secondly, I was at Consensus and I went to the Polkadot after party, and it was by far probably the coolest party I went to at that event. And beyond just kind of like, it was fun. People were listening to fun music and dancing or whatever. There were two things that really stuck out. I got to see the Polkadot logo on an Indy racing car, which was super cool. My girlfriend and I are fans of F1, so it was really nice to see like an Indy car in real life. It was a nice opportunity for me to share a photo with her and say, hey, look at me hanging out with my crypto degen friends. By the way, here's a car we both love. And secondly, I got to see a really cool use case of blockchain technology and new cutting edge innovative technology being used for a real world kind of opportunity. And when I went to the party, I onboarded, I connected a credit card to a wristband that I could use to buy drinks and to participate in like a game that was being played for everybody at the event. So there was also a really cool way for showing party goers some of the awesome things that are happening in terms of like fidgetals and onboarding, normal users through traditional rails such as credit cards to do something as simple as purchase a drink. But like that party was funded from the treasury, and we got to use some really cool technology. We got to interact with a blockchain community in a way that we normally didn't get to. So I think like, despite the fact that there were a lot of people up in arms and they were mad at KOLs getting whatever amount of money, it was really cool to kind of like see these initiatives play out in the real world. So at the end of the day, you kind of alluded to this, but sure, there was some negativity, but like, is all marketing, good or bad, still good marketing?
Yeah, I mean, look, the marketing worked, but maybe in an unintended way, for sure. But I will also say, like, it's exactly the conversation I wanted to have. I just would have liked to have it with the Polkadot community, with people who already know how this mechanism works and how the system works, and hey, who can put that conversation into the right context, right? Unfortunately, whenever we had the conversation with all kinds of people that have all kinds of opinions about marketing, without being able to like place it precisely into something constructive, right? But yeah, the second point maybe here, like the Polkadot after party, I assume it's like the bash party. Like it's exactly the kind of like entertainment focus groups that we have in the Polkadot ecosystem, right? That both think about sort of like how to onboard users, like how to really, have something that actually is tangible, where you use the technology. But also, and this is, I think, the nice thing of a lot of this entertainment stuff, is like you also get good vibes, right? They are able to like throw a party around it and have a race car there and so on, right? Like this is also something that I think is quite nice with generally the vertical of entertainment. It works a lot of aesthetics and usability, and is usually something that's very approachable to anyone. So it's a good vertical to have in our ecosystem for sure.
Yeah, I gotta admit, like the bash party wasn't even on my radar. I was walking home from another party, and a group of devs with beers in their hands walked up, and they're like, we're going to the bash party, you should come. And they're like, Polkadot throws the best parties. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And a lot of fun I had when I was there was this projector that was shooting a racing game onto the wall. And you could just walk up, go to the website, add the kind of like code, the invite code for that event. And then anybody at the event could basically like not bet with money, but like bet on which digital racing car they thought was going to win. And that was just a super cool kind of like way to bring people together and to chat. I've never seen kind of like an interactive, immersive, simple game like that allowed everybody to kind of participate if they just walk up, and the onboarding process was super simple and smooth. So yeah, I mean, like I randomly heard about the party, and then I was using technologies that were probably being incubated within the ecosystem by Web3 Foundation, possibly even from the treasury. So it was a really cool event. I guess like for the Web3 Foundation's perspective, like what was the main lesson learned? Did you put like reins on the treasury and you're like, okay, dot holders, like we're not going to spend, tens of millions of dollars on what you think is right anymore. Maybe we'll like curb your allowance.
Yeah, it's more there's a couple of things we're doing. So like one is there's actually a bit of an overhaul of the economic system in Polkadot in general. Like it simplifies the on-chain processes around like, how high is inflation, and inflation is going to come down. How is the treasury, how much money is the treasury getting? And this is going to be easier to sort of like understand how much dot is actually coming in every month. And therefore it's easier to have a treasury budgeting conversation around that. We're further doubling down on essentially the efforts that started this conversation, right? Like, hey, how should budgets look like? How should spending categories look like? And so on. We've also launched a program, it's now a couple of months ago, but we're sort of like also doubling down on that, where, as a foundation, we're not, like it is sort of like community voting, but we do have a program where people that want to, that have a very clear sort of like political agenda, and are public about that and are willing to sort of like parse through these proposals and be good actors in a governance conversation and vote on these proposals and so on, we equip them with Web3 Foundation voting power, right? And so it allows us to, let's say, sort of like elect community representation of our vote out there. And, this helps, without us sort of like just coming in and like overruling all of the votes. It just helps shaping certain conversations, but it also just helps raising the standard of conversation, right? We don't want to bribe each other. We don't want to harass each other. We want to be nice and we want to be productive and so on. And we can support people who stand for that. So, this was all on like sort of like small initiatives to fall in a similar category, but, we really want to, instead of sort of like, let's press a pause button on all of it, we want to take the right learnings and improve the mechanisms and the tools and the social layer around it, that, it can work better. And there's maybe one last point here, which is around expectation management. Even the most well-governed entities in the world, right? If you look at nation states or public companies, you should expect some governance drama. Like governance and drama are always go hand in hand. Unless you say, there's really one person who makes all of the decisions and we trust that person is great, right? Which is a totally fine model, right? I think most private companies, run well in like voluntary dictatorships. But Polkadot as a community is now so pluralistic and obviously also in the ethos of decentralization that we want to have some form of more advanced, formalized governance system. And that will come with some amount of disagreement. And, if disagreement gets too unproductive, I guess we'll call it drama. But we want to minimize that. We don't have the expectation of it to like fully disappear for forever.
Look, governance is hard, and I think any DAO that has an issue with people participating in on-chain governance and then facing backlash from those decisions kind of being acted on, ultimately, I think that's a good problem to have. And I think a lot of DAOs out there who have seen diminished on-chain activity and diminished participation would love to have one of these good problems. So maybe kind of like zooming out from the bottom up and the disagreements in how the funds were spent. Maybe we can talk a little bit as we wrap up about the top-down perspective. I'm always curious to hear how foundations view grants and distributing grant funding to teams that they view as being worthy of being invested in. And so decentralized futures has gone through its 22nd wave, or is it just called wave 22 of grant distributions?
Yeah. Okay. So those are two different programs, but yeah, it's going to lead us, I think, nicely to a conversation on how we think about this going forward. But yeah, so there's a traditional grants program in the foundation, which is in its 22nd wave or whatever, because it's running since 2017. And then there's a separate program called Decentralized Futures, which is much more, I think, encompasses our future vision of funding. And we're probably going to roll these things up into one program at some point this year. But yeah, exactly. So traditional grants is really going on for a very long time. It's essentially, you want to build a certain kind of tool in an open source world. Here are, a couple of milestones on how to get there. You send us in those milestones or have them somewhere on GitHub. We check them, we pay you out, and off we go. Decentralized futures is much more flexible, right? It's much more, like I said, more the vision. I think how I think about grants, and I think how foundations should be thinking about grants is, it's fine that you've convinced us that building this technical tool is a good idea, right? But is the rate limiting factor for Polkadot success, is that really like more technical milestone achievements? Probably not, right? I think really what we want to give people the best starting conditions to build businesses, to really go into a self-sustained world in the Polkadot ecosystem, right? Convince someone other than the foundation, like investors, users, customers, that what they're doing is a great idea, and we're here to give you really good starting conditions to do that. That could be via a grant, could be via an investment, it could be by becoming your first customer, right? But it's us getting you started, and then you live off our balance sheet for the rest of time is for for the most initiatives in the Polkadot ecosystem is not a great model, right? And so in grants, we'll always be paying out grants. It's just we're much more flexible in how we can fund people. And what does a grant really say? So you say that you do the work first, and then on the basis of a milestone, you have a payout condition, you get the money. But what about investments, right? Like, where you get the money up front, but we get a little bit of ownership and therefore alignment around what you're doing here. And so we just, 2 weeks ago or so, announced a new Polkadot ecosystem funds that we're involved in. That's really just dedicated for investment. But we really think about more holistically in terms of funding. Like someone needs dollars in their account, right? Okay, let's look at it, right? Rather than here's a grants program with very static sort of like requirements, and we push people through those steps.
Yeah, you kind of like said two things that perked my ears there. I think one of the things with kind of ecosystems that are falling off of the radar is that there's not necessarily like a VC pipeline. And what I necessarily mean by that is once a project has been grant funded to build, there's no like skin in the game for the underlying foundation or eco growth team or whatever you call it to really kind of like keep that team's feet to the fire, to provide them with further resources to grow, expand, onboard new users, whatever. And when like the foundation kind of has skin in the game, they have token allocation that really provides like a new and unique incentive model that I think can be symbiotic using economic incentives. So that's super cool to hear about. And I'll definitely be like excited to see how this plays out in the future. But then secondly, I think if you also look at the way in which the grants program distributes grant funding on the most recent Wave 22 article, you can see that there's a breakdown in the teams and the projects that were distributed grants to. And I'm part of a community funding DAO, and we're always focused on tech. What's the dApp that can be built? What's the dev that can be onboarded? But like, if you look at the breakdown, you see there's marketing, there's BD, and then there's also tech. So what are kind of like the lessons learned over the years that the team has kind of gleaned and decided that there should also be marketing initiatives and BD initiatives that are also funded by grants? And maybe what are some of like the lessons learned, the pros and cons of providing funding to like a BD team or a marketing team in conjunction with also like tech and dev builders?
Yeah, totally. So I think, one thing I would say on the tech side is that, tech is only valuable if it's useful to someone, right? And so we have much more of an eye on, what I was saying earlier is like, hey, how is this going to like contribute to someone's goals, right? Like, how is this actually a tool that enables someone to do something? And how much interest is on the other side for something like this? There's a lot of stuff that like sounds good and sounds smart in like a one-page document or like a presentation, but it doesn't mean anyone really needs it. So that's one thing. I think the other thing with sort of like BD and marketing and so on initiatives is like there's like one thing we've seen quite strongly in the Polkadot ecosystem is that there's sort of like subgroups, sub-ecosystems, sub-verticals that are emerging, right? And so there are groups that are very passionate about the success of the DeFi ecosystem within Polkadot, or the success of the gaming ecosystem in Polkadot. And their interests are broadly aligned, right? These two groups, like they want to be successful in Polkadot, they want to see Polkadot be successful and so on. But the kinds of initiatives they're driving are quite different. And the kind of expertise you have to drive those verticals forward is quite different. And so we're much more interested in funding people that, let's say do BD or spin up a fund or whatever, that are very close to the kind of industry and the kind of vertical they're trying to make successful. Because it's just there's going to be smaller teams, more nimble teams with higher expertise, teams that are much more entrepreneurial, rather than I think the most extreme version of that is if you go way back to like Ethereum land, when you had consensus with like 1,500 employees essentially doing everything Ethereum, right? We see much more of a model for Ethereum emerge after the big layoffs of consensus, where like a lot of these people that get laid off, sort of their individual organizations and companies and so on in Ethereum land that then ended up being hugely successful and are now often the underpinnings sort of like Ethereum infrastructure and dApps and so on. So, this is much more what you see in the Polkadot ecosystem now as well happening. And so naturally we lean into that in the foundation also with our funding strategy, right? We do fund people that do BD or marketing or ecosystem development type activities along the lines of areas of interest rather than just having it all in-house and driving it in some generic way.
Well, Fabian, we just touched on a topic that I would love to go for another half hour on, but in the interest of your time and respecting it, I think
over a beer at the next bash party. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think with all that said, we'll just kind of end this here. Definitely opens the door for round two over a beer or maybe even over the mic sometime in the future. But anyone who's listened to this, who's a dev, who is an interested token holder, whatever, what's the best way that they can reach out to you and the Web3 Foundation?
Yeah, look, I mean, you can find me on Twitter like at Fabian Gompf. It's my first and my last name. DMs are open. If you want to learn about the Web3 Foundation, it's just web3.foundation. And then everything Polkadot is the Polkadot network on Twitter, on all the social accounts, or on the website. So there's a new website that just launching this week. So it's definitely a good place to check out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the Smart Economy podcast. I had a blast in this conversation.
This was fun. Thanks so much, Dylan.
Cheers. Well, what did you think of that conversation? I thought it was fascinating to hear more about Fabian's perspective on how a foundation can support grassroots teams, but also projects that want to build sustainable blockchain businesses. It was also interesting to hear more about the lessons learned and his thoughts on how community governments can dictate the direction of an on-chain treasury. And it was just really cool to talk with Fabian about the emerging verticals in the Web3 space, how they've evolved over the years, and the growth that's still ahead of us. To keep up to date with the podcast, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And if you like the guests that we've had on the show, please consider showing your support by rating and reviewing the show on your favorite podcasting platform. Every rate, review, like, and subscription really helps us get in front of more ears and eyes. And of course, if you're a NEO token holder, please consider voting for NEO News today as your council representative. We have proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. So, with all of that said, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast, and we look forward to catching you next time. Thanks, team. I appreciate you.